on Hawkins with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation out of Washington, D.C. I wish I could be with you, but I just had a little baby and couldn't fly with him. But I hope that some of my remarks are helpful as you're trying to consider what you can do in Poland to curb the public health impacts of pornography. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation works on exposing the connections between all forms of exploitation, and we really advocate that when you're thinking about solutions, that you think about how these issues are often connected and overlapping with one another. For example, as you're trying to search for solutions to sexual violence or to sexting or to sex trafficking, you can't work on those as though they're just happening on their own. And we would argue that pornography is super major overlooked factor when talking about sexual exploitation issues, and it's often fueling and feeding these other problems to great extent. I'm assuming that you've now heard a little bit about some of the public health harms of pornography, the research, and about the impacts to society and the individual and the family. I will say specifically that research in great abundance is showing connections between pornography and sexual violence in society, as well as to increased demand for sex trafficking and increased acting out on children, whether it's through child sexual abuse images or actual physically acting out on children. And so I'm happy to hear that you're looking at doing some legislative efforts to curb the pornography issue. Now, we work on policy in the United States, and that's not all going to translate to what you're doing in Poland, but I thought that maybe some of these ideas would be helpful and you can take some with you. One thing I think that's really important and would be very useful is using some government funding that goes towards researching perhaps public health problems and putting some of that towards the issue of pornography, specifically looking at how pornography is impacting children, the developing brain, what early exposure is doing vis-a-vis sexual violence on college campuses or in the workplace or in the military, for example. We also need some more research about the connections between pornography and sex trafficking and prostitution. There is a good body of research already, but more is definitely needed. And along those lines, another potential solution is we need better reporting and mandated reporting, and often that's necessary for the government to get involved with. So for example, if the government was mandating that when a child sexually abuses another child, that would be incredibly helpful. We know that it's really an increased problem. It's dramatically increased in recent years, and I would argue it's likely because these kids have been exposed to pornography from really early ages, and so they're acting out what they're seeing adults do in pornography on other children. There's one area, so Missouri, the state of Missouri just passed a law last year mandating a reporting when a child acts out on another child. And they thought that really there would be maybe 600 cases a year that would be reported. And just 5 months after passing that law, there were over 2,000 cases of children acting out on children. And that's incredibly helpful to understanding really the scope of the problem, but also to understanding some of the factors contributing to that problem. A couple other things that would be helpful if law enforcement was tracking was when individuals are arrested for child sexual abuse images or for acting out on children, what is their usage of adult hardcore pornography? They don't have to record that right now, and it would be very helpful data to helping to understand the problem. Additionally, when working with victims of trafficking, having mandated reporting also around the issue of pornography. So was pornography being used? For sex acts being filmed? Is that being uploaded? Was pornography being used to advertise the women and children being trafficked? Were the buyers using pornography when they were asking women to perform certain sex acts? So all of that would be very helpful to know, but really we need the government to help us get that data. One thing that we work on at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation is legislation regarding filtering in schools and libraries. Particularly the school Wi-Fi and the school computers are often very inadequate in their level of filtering, and we're seeing that many kids are accessing pornography on school campuses, and as a result we're seeing sexual harassment, sexual assault, voyeurism, all of these kinds of things happening after kids are watching porn at school. And so how is that in Poland? Are there ways that the federal government can get involved, or particularly like funding for schools for better filters, etc.? And specifically looking at maybe any schools that are giving devices to kids. In the US now, almost all schools are giving devices to kids as young as 5 years old, 6 years old, to take home. And most of the devices are not filtered once they leave the school campus. And so we're finding that many kids developing lifelong dependencies, struggles, and addictions to pornography at really young ages because of their schools. In the United States, we also have a federal obscenity law, which is the legal term for hardcore pornography. And it's my assumption that most countries have these obscenity laws. Are they being enforced in Poland? Currently in the United States, we're not enforcing them. We haven't enforced them for about 9 years. When we were enforcing these laws, we saw a dramatic decrease in the type and amount of hardcore pornography being distributed. The pornographers started to self-regulate, and they stopped making child-themed and rape-themed pornography. And so I really urge you to look at what your country's obscenity laws are. So 2 other things that I think are really useful happened in the UK recently. The UK has essentially adopted this opt-in policy where all of the internet service providers have rolled out filters that are automatically turned on, and the customer user has to ask the ISP to turn them off if they want to access pornography. And the biggest internet service provider in the UK has said that only 30% of their customers have opted in for pornography. 70% have left a level of the filters on. And when you look at their customers broken down by family, almost all of their family customers have left the filter on. Now, this was an effort championed by the Prime Minister, David Cameron. The internet service providers actually adopted this policy without a legislative process being forced on them, but the UK did go on to pass a legislative call at the federal level. And now the UK just passed another system called age verification, where you essentially have to prove that you're 18 in order to get pornography. And I think that this is a really good solution. I spoke last week before the Canadian Parliament about age verification. We're not pushing it in the United States because it really wouldn't stand muster when it comes to our First Amendment free speech. But if this would work in Poland, it would dramatically help certainly not only your citizens, but people all around the world, as the porn companies then have to adapt as different countries are asking for this. If you are interested in the age verification or the opt-in, I'd be happy to connect you with some leaders in these other countries who have led the process, and particularly to weigh in. And then just lastly, one thing that's really important, I think, is making a statement as a country that pornography is harmful and that it has many public health impacts. And so one thing that organization did was draft a resolution, which is now past 10 states, and a version of it passed the Canadian Parliament as well, which lays out many of the public health concerns with pornography, and it's just making a statement that this is something we're concerned about. This is really helpful because it's not calling on any laws, it's not asking for any money to be tied with it. And so usually you're able to get it passed nearly unanimously. And it's something that can then be used later to refer back to as you are looking for other solutions, and to be able to refer back to the resolution or statement passed by the Polish Parliament. We're happy to share some of that information with you. Anything that we can do to help you in your efforts to combat the harms of pornography and all sexual exploitation, please count on us as a partner. My email is dawn, DAWN, @ncose.com, and our website is endsexualexploitation.org. Again, if we can help you, please let us know.